The best villains don't challenge the hero's strength, they challenge their morality. The most compelling villains are not always the ones who pose the greatest physical threat. They are the ones who make the hero stop and question something much more uncomfortable. Why do you believe you're right? Stories naturally create a bias toward their protagonists. We experience the world through their eyes. We understand their pain, their intentions, their struggles, and their reasoning. Because of that, their beliefs often become the foundation we view the entire story through. The hero's morality becomes the default. But what happens when someone challenges that? What happens when the person standing against the protagonist isn't just trying to destroy them, but is questioning the very ideas they represent? That is what makes a truly great foil villain. They aren't compelling because they are the opposite of the hero. They are compelling because they are close enough to the hero that their conflict becomes a philosophical argument. They ask questions the hero would rather avoid. Who decides what is good? Who decides what is evil? Who decides what deserves to be protected, changed, or destroyed? The most memorable villains are often the ones who understand the hero's ideals better than anyone else. They take the same world, the same problems, and sometimes even the same desires, but they reach a completely different conclusion. They are not always a rejection of the hero. They are an alternate possibility, a different path, a reminder that people are not only shaped by what happens to them, but by the meaning they choose to give those experiences. This is why Hajime Hinata and Nagito Komeda are such an interesting example. At first glance, they seem completely different. Hajime is the protagonist searching for his place in a world that values talent, while Nagito appears to be someone consumed by an extreme obsession with hope. But underneath that, they are asking the same question. What gives a person value? Both characters exist in a world where talent defines identity. Both struggle with the idea of what makes someone important. Both are searching for something meaningful. The difference is where they find that meaning. Hajime eventually rejects the idea that talent determines someone's worth. He learns that being ordinary does not make someone lesser, and that people are valuable because of their choices, their relationships, and their ability to change. Nagito takes the opposite path. He becomes so devoted to the concept of hope that he begins valuing the idea of hope more than the people who are supposed to experience it. His belief starts with something understandable, the desire for a better future, but it becomes twisted when individuals are reduced to nothing more than tools for achieving that future. Nagito is not fascinating because he is correct. He is fascinating because his beliefs force Hajime to define why he disagrees. The conflict is not simply hope versus despair. It is a question of whether an ideal is still meaningful when you sacrifice the very humanity it was supposed to protect. Death Note explores a similar conflict through Light Yagami and L. Their rivalry is fascinating because both of them believe they are pursuing justice. Light sees a broken world filled with criminals and believes someone has to take action. To him, the ability to judge others is a responsibility. If he has the power to create a better world, why shouldn't he use it? L challenges the foundation of that belief. The issue is not only whether criminals deserve punishment, the deeper question is whether any individual should have the authority to decide who deserves to live and who deserves to die. Light and L are not fighting because one understands justice and the other does not. They are fighting because they have completely different ideas of where justice comes from. Light believes justice comes from having the power to enforce what is right. L believes justice requires questioning anyone who claims they already know what is right. That is what makes their conflict so compelling. The story does not just ask who will win. It asks what happens when two people are absolutely convinced that their version of morality is the correct one. Midoriya and Jigaraki explore another version of this idea. Their conflict is not simply hero versus villain. It is a question of responsibility. What happens when someone needs saving and nobody reaches out? Midoriya's story begins with a powerless child who desperately wants to become a hero. He is someone who understands what it feels like to be helpless, but he is also someone who eventually receives the support necessary to grow. Shigaraki represents the opposite outcome. He is someone whose suffering was ignored until the wrong person offered him a hand. Their stories ask whether people become monsters on their own, or whether the world plays a role in creating the things it later fears. Again, the villain is not compelling because they are secretly the hero. They are compelling because they force the hero to confront the limits of their own beliefs. A weaker story uses villains as obstacles. A stronger story uses villains as questions. They challenge the protagonist's assumptions. They expose the uncomfortable parts of their worldview. They force both the characters and the audience to examine why they believe what they believe. Because perspective is powerful. The hero is usually the person whose story we are given. The villain is often the person whose story we are not. But a great antagonist reminds us that morality is rarely interesting when it is effortless. The most meaningful ideals are the ones that survive being questioned. The best villains do not just ask, "Can you defeat me?" They ask, "Why are you so certain you are right?" And when a story can make us genuinely consider that question, the conflict becomes more than a battle between good and evil. It becomes a battle between two different answers to what good and evil even mean.